I used to think tiredness came with a reason. Maybe a long workday, a sleepless night, a rough conversation. But this was different. This exhaustion didn't follow effort. It came before it. It began subtly. I would wake up and lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to move. There was no pain, no panic, no urgent distress, just a weight. Something invisible, heavy, pressing against my ribs. It made getting up feel like lifting mountains. I still went to work, still joined the Zoom calls, still smiled when my coworkers cracked jokes. But behind that smile was an aching stillness. Not sadness, not anxiety, just nothingness. They called me reliable. I was always the first to reply, the one who stayed a little later, picked up the extra project, filled in when others needed help. I wore my reliability like armor. But inside, I was hollow. I started canceling plans. I told people I was busy. Sometimes that was true, but often, I just couldn't summon the energy to be around others. Even small talk felt like climbing a steep hill with no shoes. I felt ashamed, because I didn't know how to explain it. What would I say? I'm tired? That sounded too simple. I'm overwhelmed? That felt too dramatic. I don't feel like seeing anyone? That felt rude. So I said nothing. My weekends, once filled with brunches and bike rides, became silent. I'd stay home, order food, and watch the same shows over and over, not because they entertained me, but because they distracted me. I didn't want stimulation. I wanted numbness. The dishes piled up in the sink. The laundry sat unfolded for a week. My inbox overflowed. And the worst part? I didn't care. I wasn't anxious about it. I wasn't stressed. I simply couldn't feel anything about it. That's when I started to wonder, am I lazy? Because I didn't feel sad. I wasn't crying, I wasn't panicked. I just didn't want to do anything, not even the things I used to enjoy. Reading felt like a chore. Music annoyed me. Conversations felt like work. I Googled, am I burnt out or just lazy? That search led me down a rabbit hole of articles, Reddit threads, psychology blogs, and somewhere, in a quiet paragraph on a clinical website, I read, emotional exhaustion often presents without visible distress. People may appear functional while internally experiencing numbness, detachment, and chronic fatigue. This is not laziness. This is a symptom. I stared at the sentence for a long time. This is not laziness. This is a symptom. The words pierced something in me. For so long, I judged myself harshly. I called myself undisciplined, weak. I said I lacked grit. I blamed myself for not being productive, for not staying motivated, for letting things slide. I never stopped to ask if maybe, just maybe, I was actually suffering. There's a type of exhaustion that sleep doesn't cure. It's not fixed by a nap, or a weekend off, or even a vacation. It's deeper. It's emotional fatigue. It's psychological depletion. I wasn't lazy. I was carrying something I couldn't name. I started to notice more signs. I'd zone out during meetings and miss entire discussions. I'd reread the same email 3 times before it made sense. I'd lose track of time staring at the wall. I knew something was wrong when I stopped reacting to things. A friend told me about their engagement. I smiled, said congratulations, but felt absolutely nothing inside. Another friend told me they were moving away. I shrugged. No sadness, no nostalgia, just blankness. Emotions had left the building, and the scariest part? Nobody noticed, because I was still functioning, still replying, still showing up. That's the trap. We think mental health struggles look like breakdowns. Tears, screaming, isolation. But sometimes they look like silence. Sometimes they look like people who seem fine. I wasn't fine. I was vanishing in slow motion. I think we need better language for this. Words that live between fine and falling apart. Words for when you're not in crisis, but you're definitely not okay. Because when we don't have the words, we blame ourselves. We call it laziness. I used to believe that rest had to be earned, that you only deserved a break if you'd worked yourself to the bone, that doing nothing was a failure of character. Now I see how wrong that was. My body wasn't betraying me, it was speaking to me. The stillness I felt wasn't laziness, it was a cry for help. But I couldn't hear it until I stopped blaming myself, until I replaced shame with curiosity. What if this is not a flaw, but a signal? That question changed everything. I started listening, paying attention, noticing when I felt heavy, noticing when I avoided things, noticing what made me feel safe. I didn't fix it overnight. I'm still learning, still unlearning. But I no longer call myself lazy, because now I know. The weight wasn't mine to carry alone. I used to love mornings. That gentle light slipping through the blinds, the quiet before the world wakes up, the smell of coffee brewing while lo-fi music hummed in the background. Mornings used to feel like a new chance, a small promise that today could be better. Now, I snooze my alarm 4 times. Not because I'm tired, but because I don't want to face the day. I lie in bed, not asleep, not awake, staring at the ceiling as if it might offer an answer to a question I can't even name. There's no dramatic reason. Nothing catastrophic happened. My job is stable. My relationships are intact. From the outside, things look fine, but inside, mornings feel like a battle I'm too exhausted to fight. At first, I thought I was just off my routine. Maybe I needed a reset. I tried morning journaling, cold showers, going to sleep earlier. Nothing stuck. Every attempt at discipline felt like climbing a hill with sand under my feet. People say success starts with winning your mornings. But what if your mornings feel like defeat before they even begin? There was a time I used to get up before the sun. I'd read for 20 minutes, go for a short jog, and start my work with a clear mind. It made me feel alive, like I had control. I miss that version of myself. But these days, my first thought is often, do I have to do this again? That thought comes with guilt. How dare I complain? I have a bed, a job, a roof over my head. There are people with real problems, I remind myself. But shame doesn't cure exhaustion. It only buries it deeper. Eventually, I stopped setting alarms altogether. I'd wake up whenever my body decided. Some days at 7:30, others at 9 o'clock. It didn't feel like rest. It felt like surrender, like I was slowly giving up the parts of life that once brought me joy. I started skipping breakfast. Too tired, too late, too indifferent. Coffee became a substitute for nutrition. Emails became a substitute for human connection. I was always plugged in, but rarely present. And still, I functioned. I answered messages, I showed up to meetings, I met deadlines. But that version of showing up was mechanical, like a ghost pushing buttons on autopilot. One morning, I missed a meeting I had scheduled myself. I wasn't asleep. I was just there. Sitting in my kitchen, staring at the clock, watching the minutes pass, and doing nothing. Not because I forgot. Not because I didn't care. But because I didn't have it in me. That was the first time I said it out loud. I think I'm burning out. Burnout doesn't always arrive with flames. Sometimes it seeps in like fog, unnoticed, gradual, and suffocating. It doesn't take everything at once. It starts with small thefts. First your energy, then your focus, Then your mornings. The irony? I was sleeping more but feeling more tired. Because rest isn't just about sleep. It's about recovery. And I wasn't recovering. I was freezing. Emotionally frozen, mentally numbed, physically dulled. When you're burnt out, everything feels like too much. Even joy, even hope, even the idea of improvement feels exhausting. I started reading about executive dysfunction, the inability to start tasks, even simple ones, like brushing your teeth, like opening an email. It felt oddly comforting to have a name for the thing I couldn't describe. They say awareness is the first step. Maybe it is. But awareness without compassion just becomes another weapon, another reason to be angry with yourself. I wasn't lazy, I wasn't broken, I was overwhelmed. Overwhelm is when your mind is full, but your heart is empty. When there's too much noise and no music. When every day becomes a list of things to survive rather than moments to live. I started with small steps. I moved my alarm clock to the other side of the room. I started placing a glass of water by my bed at night. I turned on a playlist instead of checking my phone. These weren't magical fixes, but they were signals. Signals to my body that maybe, just maybe, mornings could be safe again. Some days, I still struggle. I still wake up with dread. But other days, I rise without resistance. I open the window. I stretch. I sit quietly and let the light touch my face. Not because I conquered burnout, but because I stopped fighting myself. My mornings may never look like they did before, but they don't have to. They just need to be mine. I was still working. That's what I kept telling myself. Emails, answered, meetings, attended, projects, delivered, deadlines, met. Barely, but still. On paper, I was doing fine. In performance reviews, I scored well, no red flags. But what no one saw was how I got through each task by crawling through invisible mud. My calendar was full, but my mind was empty. I wasn't present. I was performing. I said the right things, nodded at the right moments, smiled when expected. But underneath it all, I was running on fumes. It felt like pretending to be myself. Like I was doing a really good impression of who I used to be. I remember staring at a spreadsheet for 45 minutes and realizing I hadn't typed a single number. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I couldn't bring myself to start. My fingers hovered over the keyboard like they had forgotten how to move. Sometimes I'd reread the same Slack message 5 times before responding. Not because it was complicated, just because I couldn't focus. I'd open tabs, then forget why. Open emails, then forget who they were from. I wasn't functioning. I was simulating function. At lunch, I'd sit with coworkers and laugh at jokes I didn't hear. I became an expert in making eye contact while zoning out. Nobody noticed. Maybe because I was too good at faking it, or maybe because they were too busy doing the same. One day, a coworker told me, "You're so put together. I wish I had your energy." I almost laughed. If only they knew that I had cried in my car for 10 minutes before coming in. I started questioning everything. Am I depressed? Am I lazy? Is this just adulthood? Is everyone like this? So I dug into research. I read about high-functioning depression, about masking, about people who managed to do well externally while falling apart internally. It was a strange comfort, knowing I wasn't the only one. High-functioning doesn't mean healthy. It means hidden. But in a culture that equates productivity with worth, it's hard to admit that doing the work doesn't mean you're okay. In fact, sometimes doing the work is the very thing hiding your suffering. I didn't feel proud when I crossed things off my to-do list. I felt relief. Not because the task was done, but because I could now collapse without guilt. Rest became a transaction. Earn it, then you're allowed to crash. Until crashing became the default. Until the in-between spaces, between calls, between emails, between meetings, were filled with anxiety, dread, or nothingness. Evenings weren't restful. They were escapes. Netflix, scrolling, takeout, bed. No reflection, no joy, just recovery from the act of pretending all day. I didn't want to talk about it. How do you explain, I'm not okay, but I'm still delivering? How do you say, I need help, when everyone sees you as the strong one? Eventually, I started skipping optional meetings. Then I muted group chats. Then I turned off notifications entirely. Not out of rebellion, but survival. My bandwidth was gone. I realized I was no longer working to grow. I was working to cope. The job wasn't the problem. It was the pressure I placed on myself to always be composed, always available, always competent. But competence without capacity is a recipe for collapse. The truth is, I was still working, but I wasn't living. So I started saying no. Gently at first, then more clearly. I began setting boundaries, real ones. No more answering emails after dinner. No more weekend check-ins. No more pretending I wasn't exhausted. And you know what? The world didn't fall apart. Deadlines adjusted. People understood. Or they didn't. But I did. I learned that still working shouldn't be the standard. Surviving isn't thriving. Performing isn't healing. And busyness isn't proof of value. These days, I still work. But I also pause. I breathe between tasks. I log off when I'm done. And I check in with myself more than I check my inbox. Because I deserve more than to just function. I deserve to feel human again. It always started with just a few minutes. I'd pick up my phone to check the time, maybe respond to a notification. Then suddenly, an hour would disappear. One video became 5, then 20. One post turned into a scroll hole I couldn't climb out of. It wasn't that the content was particularly good. Most of it didn't even register. I wasn't watching to enjoy. I was watching to escape, to stop thinking, to shut off, to become numb. I'd scroll through endless TikToks, Instagram reels, memes, news snippets, tweets. My thumb never stopped moving. It was a rhythm of avoidance, a way to fill the silence I was too afraid to sit with. At first it felt like a break, something light, a moment of distraction. But soon, it became my default. Wake up, scroll, lunch break, scroll, in bed, scroll. After an emotional moment, scroll harder. The screen became my safe place and also my prison. I told myself everyone does it, that I was just decompressing, that this was normal. But then I noticed something. After scrolling, I didn't feel better. I felt emptier. There was a time when silence used to be my reset, when I could walk without headphones, when journaling helped me process, when I would lie on my back and daydream. But now, the silence brought anxiety. Reflection felt unsafe. My thoughts were too loud, my emotions too raw. So I stayed online, even when I wasn't enjoying it, even when it made me feel worse. Because worse was still better than feeling everything all at once. One night, I caught myself rewatching the same 10-second clip for the third time with no sound, not even laughing, just staring. And I realized I wasn't watching it. I was using it, like a numbing agent, like a mental sedative. I looked at the time. It was 1:47 a.m., and I had no memory of the past 2 hours. The next morning, my head ached, my eyes stung, my body felt drained, not because of what I had seen, but because of what I had avoided. Digital escapism is seductive because it looks harmless. You're not drinking. You're not gambling. You're just on your phone, but the effect is the same: disconnection from your inner world. It took me a while to admit that I was addicted, not to the content, but to the absence it provided. I started tracking screen time. It shocked me. 5 hours a day, some days 7. The number didn't even reflect the worst part, which was the mindless, hollowed-out feeling afterward. The burnout that didn't come from doing too much, but from feeling too little. The scroll had replaced self-care. I didn't journal anymore. I stopped calling friends. Walks became shorter. Meals were eaten while watching reels. My life shrunk to the size of a screen. And all of it made sense when I read about digital numbing. When the brain is overwhelmed, it seeks the path of least resistance. Dopamine bursts from quick content provide momentary relief, but no emotional processing. So the real feelings, grief, fear, loneliness, get postponed, buried, delayed, but never gone. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't antisocial. I wasn't immature. I was emotionally overloaded. And the scroll was my way of saying, I can't deal with this right now. But ignoring pain doesn't heal it. It just gives it more time to grow. So I began breaking the pattern. I turned off autoplay. I deleted the apps off my home screen. I replaced my morning scroll with music, then slowly added journaling back in. I set a rule: no phone during meals, no scrolling in bed. It wasn't perfect. I relapsed often. But over time, I started reclaiming moments. I remembered what it was like to look out the window and just be. To let a thought finish itself. To cry without distraction. To feel bored and not panic. Because boredom is the space where healing starts. It's where you meet the truth you've been running from. Now, when I feel the urge to scroll, I pause. I ask, what am I trying not to feel right now? And most days, that question is enough to bring me back to myself. The screen still calls to me. But I've learned to listen to something quieter. The voice inside me that says, stay. Be here. You're strong enough to feel this. Because healing isn't always about doing something. Sometimes, it's about doing nothing. And letting that be enough. They called me lazy. Not out loud, but in glances, in jokes, in the subtle tightening of their voices when they asked, what have you been up to lately? I could hear it. The disappointment tucked behind politeness. It was in the way my parents sighed when I said I hadn't applied to anything new. In how my friend raised her eyebrow when I canceled plans again. In how my coworkers spoke about me when they thought I couldn't hear. How I used to be so proactive, so driven. And I hated that they thought that. But more than that, I hated that part of me believed it too. There were days I couldn't get out of bed. Not because I didn't want to, but because every fiber of my body felt like it was made of sand. I'd open my laptop, stare at the blinking cursor, and close it again. I'd draft responses to messages and never send them. I'd imagine leaving the house, then talk myself out of it. And the worst part? I wasn't even sad. I wasn't crying, I wasn't screaming. I was still. Heavy, silent, numb. I Googled symptoms, trying to find a label. Depression? Burnout? Executive dysfunction? I read that chronic stress can make even the simplest tasks feel monumental. That a dysregulated nervous system can convince you you're in danger even when you're safe. But a part of me still whispered, you're just making excuses. Because no one teaches you how to explain this kind of tired. No one tells you that psychological exhaustion can look like laziness. That being unable to do something is different from refusing to. I remembered all the times I judged others. All the times I assumed someone was unmotivated, when really, They were overwhelmed. I saw now how easy it is to confuse struggle with apathy. I started writing it down, the things I did manage. I brushed my teeth today. I replied to 2 emails. I made coffee instead of skipping breakfast. I folded half the laundry. They seemed small, embarrassingly small. But they were victories, not against laziness, but against collapse. What people didn't see were the mental negotiations behind every action, the arguments in my head, the pep talks, the guilt, the restarting. And still, they saw only the outcome, that I hadn't shown up, that I'd missed another deadline, that I'd gone quiet. Eventually, I stopped trying to explain. When someone joked, "Must be nice to do nothing all day," I smiled. I didn't say, "I spent 4 hours trying to start a task and still failed." I didn't say, "I'm scared something is wrong with me." I didn't say, "Every day feels like drowning in invisible quicksand." I just let them think what they wanted, because I was tired of defending an illness they couldn't see. It wasn't until I read someone else's story, someone describing the same frozen, heavy feeling, that I started forgiving myself. I saw the word inertia, not physical, but emotional, not from laziness, but from overload. Inertia means something in motion tends to stay in motion, but it also means something at rest tends to stay at rest, unless acted on by a force. I realized I needed help being that force, not judgment, not shame, just support. So I reached out, not in grand gestures, but in small texts. Can you check in on me this week? Can we work together in silence? Can you remind me it's okay to start small? And slowly, I did. 1 step, 1 email, 1 load of laundry, 1 walk outside. I wasn't lazy. I was healing. I was learning to move again, to trust myself, to show up, even if clumsily. So now, when I see someone flaking, retreating, zoning out, I don't assume. Because sometimes the laziest looking people are fighting the hardest battles. And the bravest thing they do all day is simply begin. It wasn't a breakdown. Not the dramatic kind, anyway. There was no sobbing on the floor, no screaming into pillows, no cinematic moment of collapse. It was quieter than that. I was standing at the kitchen sink, holding a spoon. I had been meaning to wash it for over an hour. 1 spoon, 1 simple task. But something in me just stalled. I stood there, frozen, staring at it, feeling a familiar wave of shame tighten around my chest. And then, without warning, tears filled my eyes. Not because of the spoon, but because of everything it represented. My inability to do the simplest things. My fear of becoming someone I didn't recognize. My exhaustion from pretending I was okay. That was the moment I whispered it. I need help. It felt like failure. I'd built my entire identity on being strong, being capable, being the one who supported others. I was the advice giver, the organizer, the dependable one. Admitting I couldn't handle my own life felt like confessing a crime. I worried what people would think. Would they stop trusting me? Would they pity me? Would they dismiss it as being dramatic, or worse, weak? But I couldn't keep carrying it alone. The weight had become unbearable, and silence was no longer a shield. It was a cage. So I made the call. Not a dramatic call. Not to a crisis line or a therapist. Not yet. I called a friend, one of the few people who had gently asked if I was okay, even when I lied and said yes. "I think I need help," I told her. My voice cracked, but I said it. "I'm not okay." She didn't say, "You'll be fine." She didn't say, "It could be worse." She just said, "I'm here. Let's figure this out together." and for the first time in weeks, I exhaled. The next day, I booked a therapy session. My hands trembled while filling out the intake form. I hesitated when asked to rate my symptoms. I didn't know how bad it was. I just knew I didn't want to feel like this anymore. The first session was awkward. I didn't know where to start. I felt embarrassed talking about things that sounded small, not wanting to wake up in the morning, zoning out during conversations, being too tired to shower. But the therapist didn't flinch. She nodded. She listened. She helped me name things I couldn't describe, like emotional fatigue, cognitive overload, and depressive inertia. She didn't make me feel broken. She made me feel human. And slowly, I began to understand. Asking for help isn't giving up. It's choosing to stay. Since then, I've had good days and bad ones. Days when I feel lighter. Days when I still stare at spoons. But I talk about it now. Not always out loud, but to myself. I name what I feel. I honor what I carry. I let people in, even just a little. And every time I do, the shame loses a little more power. Healing didn't come all at once. It came in texts I dared to send, appointments I kept, boundaries I started setting. It came in moments when I told the truth, even when it scared me. People think asking for help is a last resort. But maybe it's the first real act of courage. The moment you decide that your pain is worth tending to, that you deserve relief, that you matter. The day I asked for help wasn't the day I broke. It was the day I began to come back to myself. Healing didn't look like I thought it would. It wasn't some glorious sunrise where everything suddenly made sense. It didn't arrive with trumpets or breakthroughs or a perfect morning when I felt whole again. It came slowly. It came in tiny, quiet, almost invisible steps. Like remembering to drink a full glass of water before noon. Like putting on real clothes, even if I wasn't leaving the house. Like replying to one text message, just one, that had sat unanswered for a week. Some days, healing looked like sitting in the sun for 10 minutes. Other days, it looked like crying in the shower without trying to stop myself. Some days, it was journaling. Other days, it was just noticing that I hadn't spiraled as deeply as before. I used to measure progress by how productive I was, how many boxes I ticked, how much closer I was to my goals. But those metrics no longer worked. Healing didn't follow a checklist. It wasn't linear. And some days, surviving was the only thing on the list. And that had to be enough. I had setbacks. So many of them. I'd feel better one week, then fall into the same hole the next. For a while, that made me feel like I was failing. But my therapist told me, "You're not starting over. You're starting from experience." That changed everything. Because I realized healing wasn't about never feeling low again. It was about recognizing the lows, responding to them with compassion, and knowing they wouldn't last forever. So I started tracking something new. Not my output, but my awareness. I'd note when I caught myself spiraling and paused, when I showed up to something I was tempted to cancel, when I said no without guilt, when I rested without shame. These were wins, small, invisible to most, but powerful to me. I stopped chasing the version of me that existed before the burnout. That person was built on overfunctioning, people-pleasing, and perfectionism. I didn't want to go back. I wanted to go forward, gently, consciously, sustainably. I also started letting others in, not all at once, but in careful, cautious ways. I'd say, "I'm having a low day," instead of canceling in silence. I'd text, "I need support," instead of pretending I was fine. I'd ask to sit in silence with a friend just to feel less alone. And the more I did that, the more I saw the healing was already happening, not in huge leaps, but in trust, in presence, in honesty. One day, I caught myself laughing, really laughing. Not the performative kind, a full belly, eyes closed kind of laugh. And it surprised me. Not because I had forgotten what laughter was, but because I didn't realize how long it had been. It was proof. The light had never fully left. It had just been buried under exhaustion and silence. So I kept going. I made peace with progress that didn't look impressive. I honored the tiny steps. I stopped apologizing for the pace of my recovery. Because healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about reconnecting with what's still whole. Hope didn't look the way I expected. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't come with fireworks or some grand realization. It arrived softly, like the way light filters through curtains on a slow morning. It looked like waking up and not dreading the day ahead, like wanting to open the window, like realizing I hadn't thought about quitting everything in over a week. Hope looked like texting someone just to say hi, not because I needed saving, but because I wanted connection. It looked like making plans for next month, not out of obligation, but because I was starting to believe there might still be good things waiting for me. It was noticing beauty again. A song that moved me. A breeze that calmed me. The way sunlight danced on a mug of tea. These weren't big moments, but they were real. And they meant something. Hope also looked like boundaries, like turning down things that drained me, like walking away from dynamics that made me small, like choosing rest without guilt, joy without justification, softness without shame. I used to think hope was something you found, but maybe it's something you rebuild, one gentle choice at a time. There were still hard days. Of course there were. Days when my body felt heavy and my thoughts too loud. But the difference now was, I didn't fear those days. I didn't mistake them for failure. I knew they would pass, and I knew I could get through them. That's what hope did. It didn't eliminate pain, but it gave me tools. It gave me patience. It gave me perspective. And most importantly, it gave me myself. Because at the heart of hope is the belief that you are worth the effort. That you matter, not for what you produce, not for who you please, but simply because you exist. I started showing up in the world differently, softer, slower, more intentional. I let go of the pressure to impress, to prove, to earn rest. I gave myself permission to be a work in progress. I wasn't trying to return to some past version of myself. I was building someone new, someone rooted in awareness, in honesty, in kindness. I found joy in small rituals. Lighting a candle before journaling, stretching while music played, sending voice notes instead of disappearing, checking in on friends without waiting for the perfect moment. Hope looked like embracing my humanness, messy, nonlinear, unpredictable. It meant giving grace to the parts of me that still flinched, still forgot, still feared. And in doing so, I became whole not in spite of my struggles, but because I had lived through them and kept choosing to stay. So if you're reading this and wondering what hope looks like, maybe it looks like you. Waking up again, trying again, breathing through it, letting light in even when your hands are shaking. Hope isn't loud, but it is steady. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do is believe that your tomorrow is worth showing up for.